Hi everyone, this is Dr. Dan Ratner. Today I am joined by Carole Randell. I'm very excited to talk with her. She has started up a mind-body clinic online at 60 years of age. This is her first year doing it, and she's doing great work. Can't wait to hear about how she's doing it. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally. Carole, welcome to the show. I'm so glad to have you on. I have a lot of connections over the pond at this point through Georgie Oldfield, and I know that you are part of SERPA.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you got connected with her that way. But I want to hear about you.
Okay.
And so here's what I'd like to do. First, I want to hear, what was your initial mind-body experience? Some people come to this field through a particular mind-body experience, and others come to it other ways. They get trained in it, or they come across somebody who is training in it. What was your story?
So I had a quite a long recovery process from chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. So I had a kind of a very big crash in my sort of late 30s, early 40s. I was managing GP practices at the time. And I just literally came to a halt one day. This was based on a lot of life issues that happened along the way, a lot of stresses along the way, adverse childhood experiences. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family home. I was the perfectionist, asked me to do something, I'd be there in 3 different places at the same time, would make things work, basically. So, so I'm very, very driven.
It's amazing how functional Goodists are.
Yes.
We are among the most functional people. I'm not saying it to brag either, because sometimes it's a burden.
Yeah, all with a smile, of course, and all with, nothing's too much trouble. Yeah, what do you want? I'm your girl, sort of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I will say I can personally relate to that. I kind of had this aspect of myself that, and I still do. Less so now, but I used to think I'm like a superhero. I don't mean that I thought that highly of myself, but I mean I challenged myself to, I can do it. I can fix this situation. I can do this. So how long was your bout with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, or is it something that you consider to be still going on in some way? How do you think about that?
I'm very glad to say that it's completely free of any symptoms now. It went on for nearly 10 years. It was quite a journey. I tried everything and anything I could to get well, but realised actually that I had to take a long, hard look at my emotional side of what was going on for me, because I kind of cut off from this bit, didn't feel things so much, so very analytical, very goal driven, as I said before. So I really had to get in touch with that emotional side of myself. So yeah.
And okay, so how long did it go on for, though? I didn't hear that.
About 10 years altogether.
10 years. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's a long time. And I wondered if you could talk. I had 8 years of back pain, so I can relate. And I actually, if I think about it, I'm 46 now. I've had 46 years of mind-body experience. So
yeah.
I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you felt emotionally during that time, and when was it that you discovered the mind-body process, and how did that happen?
Well, I basically lost everything. Really, I lost my job, my home. It caused stresses within the family as well, within my personal relationship with my husband. I really didn't have a sense of who I was at all. It really brought me to my knees. So to the point, that I wasn't functioning at all on a daily basis. I was what they call tired but wired, couldn't sleep, but was constantly on hyper alert all the time, looking for dangers, etc. So it caused me to lose my home, lose my job, literally financially, I was on the floor as well. And it was a very gradual process to realizing that it wasn't just one thing that would get me better. It was a combination of things. So I had to look at the emotional, I had to look at the physical. And I had to look at my power. That's one of the things that you bring into the conversation as well, and find out actually who I was and what were the drivers behind this. What was my why behind why I became so unwell? And to really understand those, I had to go right back to basics. I first became, I suppose, aware of Dr. Sarno around only 3 or 4 years ago. I'd been through 2 or 3 different approaches to recovery as far as chronic fatigue was concerned, and it got me to a certain space. There's no doubt about it. It got me back into work. It got me back into functioning again, feeling alive, but putting my health, I guess, at the heart of my decision making. And then I came across the Dr. Sarno thing, and it was just like a light bulb, really. The light went on in my head. And then the recovery didn't take that long after that. It took about 9 months altogether of putting a plan together for myself that fitted with Dr. Sarno's work. And then I kind of became interested in more psychological side of things with recovery as well, trying to mind shift with people with beliefs and values and things like that. They were quite important to me and made a big shift for me. And then I met Georgie as well, and did the training, and here I am kind of today, I guess.
So obviously it's been a long journey, and I've talked to people before about chronic fatigue. And my sense is, from talking to some of these people or hearing comments, some people argue that it's like a different thing than other mind-body experience, that it just infiltrates at a greater level in some way, or it's harder to move in some way. I'm not saying that's true, but I wondered, can you comment on that? What's your thought about that?
Yeah, it takes a huge mind shift, because you can get hung up on labels. I had kind of a label for everything at one point, and that defined who I was. But actually, that's not really who we are at all. We are very individual. I think everybody can make a huge inroad into recovery if they will only just shift their mindset. And that's really what Dr. Sarno talks about, isn't it? Is shifting that belief. Actually, you can do this. You can do it with the right support. Some of us need more support than others. We don't all get the book recovery, but some of us do as well. But the crucial thing is all about not believing what you hear, not believing what you see, but actually finding your own truth and living that truth, I guess, is the way I'd put it. So, yeah, I think it's most definitely possible to recover. And a lot of people get entrenched in the label.
Well, it's beautifully said, and I wondered if you could talk more about what you said about power, because, of course, as you know, that's one of the two main areas that I talk about, between doubt and power, that I find is different than what I'm finding out there in the mind-body community in general. How did you, once you discovered Sarno and you started getting better, how did you figure out that your personal power needed to be in the mix somehow?
I realised that the messages that I'd kind of received growing up weren't true. They were other people's beliefs and messages. And actually, I didn't know I had such thing as a power. I always thought I was sort of reliant on other people's responses, how they behave towards me. So I tried to be that sort of Buddhist, perfectionist, driven, reliable, people-pleasing kind of person. But I realised, these were my disservices, if you like. So in order to step into my power, I really had to think hard and say, right, this is what I need in my life. And that meant letting go of people. It meant letting go of roles that I'd played in the past. It meant letting go of belief systems that I'd carried along with me, and really making my health the heart of my decision making. And that's when I really did step into my power.
I was thinking, too, as you were saying this, that to care about your health, it really is caring about yourself at a level that you weren't before. And I found this to be the case for me, that I thought I cared about myself, but the reality was, in a lot of ways, I didn't. I was really attacking myself a lot of the time, and I was not giving myself things a lot of the time. Does that resonate with you?
Most definitely. I think one of the big things for myself was about self-care, actually, and thinking about what do I need on a daily basis. The first thing I do when I wake up in the mornings is think, okay, Carole, what do you need today? And if that means starting off with meditation, I'll start off with a meditation. If it means I want to get up and have a cup of coffee, I'll go and have a cup of coffee. So this is about checking in, with yourself.
It's a great point. I'm glad you highlighted it, because really a lot of this journey, and I tell people this all the time, you can't just look for one solution that's going to end that. It's actually it's a lifestyle. You're choosing to be present with your mind and your body and to know what you want. And so you have an online pain clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And how long have you had that? When did you start?
Just over a year, actually. So
wow.
It was just literally weeks before lockdown. I'd spent a lot of my life juggling being a counsellor, psychotherapist, with working a part-time or full-time job as well. And I made the decision, if not now, when? That was my final piece of my puzzle. And I'd reached 60 as well. So that was quite a big milestone for me too. Mm-hmm. So it was a question of just taking that big leap off the edge, and trusting.
That's making me think of a particular thing that I have experienced. I think the if not now, when piece of things is very important to highlight, because so much of the time people who are in pain, I mean, this, but I'm kind of talking to the audience here as we're thinking about it together. So much of the time people are not realizing that they're not taking steps forward that they could. They're waiting for something. And I certainly was. But it's interesting because I also, I grew up, you may know this from watching some of the videos, but I grew up having lost my father when I was only 6 weeks old. So I had a sense of urgency always. Mm-hmm. My problem was my urgency was not being applied to what I wanted. It was being applied to everything else.
Yeah.
So we've got to combine that sense of, carpe diem, seize the day, with who am I? And what do I want? And so I'm really impressed that you stepped out into the world and said, I'm going to do this. That's pretty cool.
It was quite cool. I must admit, I did have a lot of support from the family and friends as well, who said, were very encouraging along the way. And they said, what's the worst that can happen, or what else is possible? So there were two sort of affirmations, I guess you might call them, that I've taken along with me through this route over the last 12 to 13 months.
Right. Absolutely. So tell me about this clinic. How did you structure it? Did you know how you wanted to structure it, or is that something that's kind of unfolded over the year?
It really sort of based it on my own recovery, I guess, and what I was looking for. And I should think if you pulled a name of any holistic therapy, any, classic medical, referral, I'm sure I would have been there, done that, and got the t-shirt and spent the money on it along the way. So I think I pretty much have got a whole toolkit of my own, that I've learnt. So my biggest question for me in my recovery was why me? And then I got to thinking, well, why not me? Right. So it was really, for me, it's been the biggest learning of my life. I'm really pleased now, and I know it sounds ridiculous, that I, had these two things, fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue, because actually I have learned, and I've been on such a journey. It's been an amazing experience. It's brought me to where I am today. And that's really what I want for my clients, to be able to have a journey with somebody that's been there themselves, so actually they know where they are. It's also, there's lots of things in common, but it's also a very individual journey for people. And I think that was really important for me to be able to connect with people, to see them as a person. And when I say to them, what's your relationship with yourself? You just get this blank look from people. But that's fundamentally what this online clinic is all about, is re-engaging with self and finding out actually who you are.
It's brilliantly said. And I couldn't agree more with really everything you said, but I want to highlight a particular aspect that you brought up there. So of course, I'm sure you do the same thing. When I'm talking with people who are actively suffering, I'm not telling them, oh, you're going to be grateful for this pain, because they're not remotely there yet. And how would they be? You cannot be grateful for crippling, awful pain. But it is weird, because in retrospect, I feel like the biggest change agent of my life was the back pain, or at least the resolution of the back pain. And the way I think about it, and I'm sure you will agree with this because we see eye to eye on so many of these things, is it is these symptoms are a communication between us and ourselves. And to receive that communication and then change your life because of it is huge. And no one was convincing me to change it, but my body did. Does that feel in line with what you experienced?
Yes, I think so. And most definitely slowing down long enough to hear the message. Each one of these symptoms or signals, or how we kind of discharge, these things in our body, we have to realize that, we're being sent this message for a reason. But we just need to stop long enough and breathe. That's the big thing, isn't it? Learn to breathe properly.
Yeah, actually, I would say even we need to recognize that we're not breathing. Even.
Yeah.
That's something that happened to me.
Yeah. It all sort of comes from up here, doesn't it? So we need to change that. And I think once we can start to re-engage with that, then the magic starts to happen. And it doesn't take that long, really.
That's one incredible thing. I think it's a very important part of what I highlight that I think does help people. I talk about moment-to-moment thinking, that we are moment-to-moment beings. We're constantly changing because our minds are always changing, and that means our physiologies are always changing. It doesn't feel like that when you're feeling something chronically, of course.
It feels like you're stuck in that forever.
Yeah, I the way I talk about it is that it's like you're renewing a subscription to your symptom. Second by second. You're like, yep, I'll do the same thing. Yes, I'll do the same thing. And until we change who we are or how we're relating to ourselves, it's going to stay the same. So you mentioned, before we started the interview, you mentioned that you have kind of eight parts to what you do. I want you to have a chance to highlight what it is you do, because that's, each mind-body clinician is different.
Yeah. So I start really with taking quite an extensive pre-assessment questionnaire. So it gives me some idea of what you've been through, as it were. And then in our first session, we look at 8 elements to well-being. So we look at different areas of your life. And this is about bringing you back to thinking about yourself. So we look at things like nutrition. So this is about self-care, really. How well do you look after yourself? Do you see, a meal as something to be got through as quickly as possible, just to fuel you up to get to the other end? Or do you actually really plan what you're doing? What are your thoughts around self-care? Because quite a lot of my clients have been living in sort of a high state of anxiety, then I also get them to go to the doctor's GP and request particular blood tests. And we'll look at things like adrenals, thyroid,
Sure.
the B12s, magnesium, zinc, all those sorts of things that might be depleted. So we can start to look at the physical first to sort of get them back on track to feeling their best physically. And then we'll go into things like emotional health. I'll talk to them about self-care, what you do for self-care, that sort of thing. And the environment that you're in as well. Now, the environment is not just where you're sitting in the space you are today. This is also about your work environment. This is about your own personal space. Do you have any? Because that's really important too.
Right.
So
Right.
we look at that type of environment. We look at who you surround yourself with. We look at things like EMFs, the electromagnetic frequencies. Are you hooked onto your iPad, etc.? So you've got no time for yourself, all that sort of thing. And we look at lifestyle and pace, because as we know, being the type of people that we are driven, we kind of don't have a cut-off switch. So getting them to actually take a time to breathe and to bring mindfulness and meditation into their lives can be really best beneficial in slowing the system down. So that's the first part of the whole physical approach. And then I'll move into relationships, and I split this into a few areas. So we look at family, friends, partner, but primarily the relationship with yourself. And that's when the blank look comes in and they say, what do you mean? So,
Right.
and that's always very interesting, quite entertaining.
Yeah.
And finally, we then move on to things like movement. So making sure that people are at least getting out in the fresh air, trying to do some walking if possible, some very gentle yoga. That's not all about getting the body beautiful. That's all about learning to breathe again. And then finally, we'll look at something like life purpose. But we'll also bring in things like adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, if necessary, looking at the inner child, things like that. But, it just really depends on what comes through in their pre-assessment questionnaires, how I sort of individualize the program to them.
Okay, now, I sometimes when I'm interviewing somebody, something occurs to me that wasn't what I thought I was going to ask. But I was thinking, how has it changed you to form this clinic and feel like you're channeling your own experience of recovery? I will say, certainly for myself, it has made me feel like, you mentioned purpose. This is what made me think of it. My purpose in life is completely different than it was before. No, I shouldn't say completely different, but it's much more honed. It's much more in line with who I am. I kind of feel like I'm channeling myself into the work in a way that I wasn't before. How has that played out for you? I'm curious about that.
I always say to people, life purpose is about doing what you love and loving what you do. And I can honestly say the first time in my life, I am stood in that space right now in a strength that I didn't know I possessed. I'm calm. I feel at peace with myself. I look forward to every day. Every person I speak to, I learn something from. And it's just fascinating. The more I work with people, the more fascinated I become, and I'm become like a detective. It's exciting.
It's funny you say that, because when I was a kid, one of my heroes, this is a fictional hero, but I loved Sherlock Holmes.
Mm-hmm.
I loved that he, thought about things and could figure out the riddle of things. And my cousin and I had this pretend detective agency. Now, don't worry, we weren't 16. We were probably 7. But I have found that the body is a way to be a detective with yourself and with other people. And it's part of how I've developed my system. My system, it really is detective work. It's like, how do we sort out what is happening here? So my ears pricked up when I heard you say that. But I think, the fact that you're getting joy out of doing this, you said you're 60, something around that.
Yeah.
You lived a long life before this, not having that at all. I wondered about something, because I've had this experience myself. I thought that I was happy, but I really wasn't. And it's an important part of the work, I find, to recognize. A big part of the work is recognizing what you were not doing or what you didn't have accessible to you. Happiness was one. I was breathing really shallowly a lot of the time, and I didn't realize that. I was not accepting my own power. I wasn't even really checking in with, how do I really feel about this? And I certainly wasn't validating that what I felt was legitimate. The body is the thing that got me to do it. And so I'm wondering about you in your work with other people. What do you see as the key change agent that you're finding?
For me, it's not one thing in particular. It's just that when you start to settle down into who you are, and you can take enough time to reflect about why you're doing the things you do, what your drivers are, what your conflicts are, what your triggers are, then it starts to open up a whole new thought process. And I think it's when you open up that thought process and you allow that to run and you don't try and close it back down again, as long as you've got the support, from either from somebody like myself or from stuff that you learn, I think it just opens the whole world up into a place of possibilities. And I think that is the exciting part about this work, because we think when people arrive to me, they are really on their knees. They just don't know where to go anymore, and they're in a whole heap of pain, physically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever you'd like to call it. All of it all together. And to see somebody at the end of even the first session say, "Hey, I hadn't even thought of that. Thank you." That makes it. It really does inspire all of us, to keep doing this work.
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head about something that I say a lot of the time, which is it's really about new information. We have to get the person new information or a new way of thinking, because otherwise we're just staying in the same pattern. And I have found, so I was a therapist for at least 10 years before I discovered Sarno. And actually, let me think how long it was. It was almost 15 years. And I had done pretty solid therapy in a lot of ways, but nothing compared to what I can do now that I understand this, because, and this is a message I want all of the viewers to understand, we can change fast. These things that we think can never be changed, that maybe we've had for 60 years or however many years.
Yeah.
We can change fast when we recognize that there's new information. And so you're bringing new information and boom, some light bulb goes off. It's a particularly gratifying part of the work, I find. And I think challenging belief systems. So this is a podcast called Crushing Doubt. One of the things that I do is I help people question assumptions that they've made. And first it's about the symptoms, but eventually it becomes about them and how they can live. Is that, look, we all have different ways of saying these things, but is that in line with some of the things that you end up saying to your patients? And if so, what's the language that you use for what I would call doubt?
Basically, you can change in a heartbeat. That's the way I put it. And we can change our thought process so very quickly if we are willing to set down what we believe we picked up along the way, I guess. We get so many beliefs, don't we, from childhood. You're this, you're that. Then you get work thrown in, and you get, peer pressure and all of that, and, the media and everything else. So we've got all of these beliefs that are, tumbling around in here. And we think we're defined by these beliefs, but actually we're not. We can change that in a heartbeat. If we look at the belief, so I pop it onto a tabletop and we write out a belief, and we have legs. And I say, okay, so what underpins this belief? Where has it come from? How long have you been carrying it around? And if we change this and we reaffirm it into a more positive way of looking at the world, what would life look like? What would it look like in an hour, in a day, in a week, in a year from now? And that this is the whole thing of opening up these possibilities, which are, really just kind of blows your mind, doesn't it?
It does. And, I want to just say one last thing. We'll wrap up here for today, Carole, and we can certainly have you back on if we want to continue this discussion, which I'm sure we will over the years. A lot of people think that we are saving lives by helping people with pain. And of course we are. But I think we're doing something in a way even bigger, which is we are activating lives. Or helping the people activate themselves is a better way of putting it. And that's just very exciting work. And I think it's wonderful what you're doing. I think it's fantastic that you've had that change in yourself. And I'm happy for you. I know that happiness from you is now getting extended to other people. You're building happiness in other people. So I applaud you, and I want to thank you for taking the time to come on and talk with me about this, and let's keep in touch.
Yeah, thanks for the invite. I'd look forward to it. Thanks, Dan.
All right, Carole.
Bye now.
I just love connecting with people who do this work because they're all so different. And actually, one of the things that happened that helped me know that Carole was going to be different actually was she said to me before the interview, she said, you talk at a high speed. And I realized, I am a very animated person, as people know, and I think a lot of people like that about me, but Carole has this nice, calm way of doing things. And I can tell she's inhabiting who she is in the work. And, one of the ways that I inhabit myself in the work is to be animated. I like to be fully myself. But this interview captured a lot of good things, and I think one of the things that stood out most to me is that here is another mind-body clinician who really, really understands the moment-to-moment thinking that I'm talking about. We can change on a dime all kinds of things that we did not think we could change. The first step is we've got to challenge the assumption that we can't. And I thought Carole brought that out beautifully, among other things that she said. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and I'll get back to you personally.